Good afternoon. The Provost Spotlight is a forum we put together about a year ago to highlight the accomplishments of our faculty and for us to learn about their scholarship and the challenges and their special interest. Frankly, the idea behind it is relatively simple. We have outstanding faculty members here who are exceptional in your research. What we're trying to do is to get to know the person behind that research. As researchers, at some point, there's something either in our personal journey in life, experiences we had as a child, that led us into the research that we're doing here. So oftentimes we have faculty who are known internationally and nationally for their work, but here at home, we really don't know a whole lot about them. So this series here is designed for us as faculty and staff to get to know our faculty members very well. It just so happened that this fall series is dedicated to two of our remarkable rising stars. They both won the State Council of Higher Education Teaching Award, and that is the Outstanding Faculty Award is the highest honor offered by the Commonwealth of Virginia to faculty in public and private colleges and universities. Also recognizes excellence in teaching, research, and public service. Before I turn this over to Dr. Annette Finley, across white, who is going to moderate this conversation, I would like to just take a minute here to give you just a tidbit about the two outstanding faculty members that we're going to be hearing from in a few minutes. The first person is Dr. Bridget Anderson, who is an associate professor of applied linguistics in the College of Arts and Letters. Dr. Anderson obtained her Bachelor of Arts in English from Western Carolina University, Master of Arts in English from North Carolina State University, and PhD in linguistics from the University of Michigan. She came to Old Dominion University in 2005. She's a specialist in acoustics, phonetics, and language variation. Dr. Anderson studies Cherokee English, Appalachian English, and African American English. She has published Migration, Accommodation, and Language Change at the intersection of regional and ethnic identity with Palgrave in 2008. Her second book, Southern Mountain Talk, The Language of Appalachia, is under contract with the University of Tennessee Press. Dr. Anderson is known for articulating her belief that all dialects, both stigmatized and standard, are equal. For Anderson, this is a linguistic fact of life. She believes dialect is not tied to intelligence, but emerges from other features of speech. Dr. Anderson is a very popular professor who teaches English language and linguistics, as well as courses on phonology and social linguistics. She has also built service learning projects into her coursework. And here are some comments from some of our students. One of them said, "There are days when going to college is just a drag and seems to be a burden. However, anyone who takes a class with Dr. Anderson is guaranteed to have a life-changing experience that is fun, vibrant, and packed with information." In 2008, Dr. Anderson won the Outstanding Faculty Award as a rising star from the State Council of Higher Education in Virginia, SHEV. Our second special guest this afternoon, Dr. Jennifer McKelly, who is an assistant professor of engineering technology in the College of Engineering and Technology. Dr. McKelly obtained her Bachelor of Science in Naval Architecture and Marine Engineering from Webb Institute, and also a Master of Science in Ocean Systems Management from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and a PhD in Mechanical Engineering from the best university in the country, Old Dominion University. She began her career at Old Dominion University in 2013 and currently heads the Marine Engineering Systems, a specialty in the Department of Engineering and Technology and the Marine Engineering minor. Before coming to Old Dominion University, Dr. McKelly had 18 years experience as a naval engineer and spent 10 years working for the Department of Defense. She is an expert in naval architecture, marine engineering, ship design and production, design optimization, and naval acquisition. Since taking up the position at Old Dominion University, she has secured over $3 million in grants. And here are some comments from some of our students. One says, in my 4 years attending Old Dominion University, I have not met another individual as dedicated to serving so many, including the university, its students, the Navy, and marine industry as a whole. Honor student, this is probably the only class where I try not to look at my phone or computer. I really cared to listen to the material that was given. Dr. McKelly is a 2007 winner of the Admiral Millsville Award for Outstanding Technical Achievement from the U.S. Naval Service Warfare Center. In 2017, she won the Outstanding Faculty Award as a Rising Star from the State Council of Higher Education in Virginia. Thank you so much again for inviting both of them.
So, let's begin. You ready?
Okay.
Okay. Easy question. Tell us a little about your background and what drew you to linguistics.
Well, my background is that I grew up in far western North Carolina, about as far west as you can go in North Carolina, 2 hours west of Asheville. Most people think North Carolina ends at Asheville, but it does not. In the part of North Carolina that is right on the Tennessee border. So it was a very rural area and not a lot of industry and lots of natural, lots of national forest and Forest Service land. And when I was growing up, I just never thought I would leave the mountains. I chose a small school in Western North Carolina, about an hour and 15 minutes from where I grew up for my undergrad, Western Carolina. And it was there in a history of English class that I really started thinking about linguistics, because we were doing some of the pronouns from Old English, and I recognized like hit for it, and then some other words too that my great-grandparents and my grandparents had, but which I had always been told growing up, not by my family, but by outsiders, were incorrect ways of saying things. My professor, who was a linguist in the English department, Dr. Carl Nicholas at Western Carolina, said, "Oh no, this is not bad English at all. This is Appalachian English. It's some relic features in Appalachian English that survived, a really long time." And so I undertook a research project for his class in which I interviewed 4 generations of my family. And I started out working on syntax, which is pretty funny now because I specialize in sounds, but I like syntax, and that's what I started out with. And the Honors College sent me to the National Undergraduate Research Conference to present that. And that is, I decided then that this was what I wanted to do, and that's what I've been doing ever since.
Great. So tell me what it was like to grow up in rural Appalachia.
Well, you spend a lot of time outside. So we did a lot of trail things like hiking, and my parents gave in to my incessant demands for a four-wheeler. I had to have a four-wheeler. I really wanted a dirt bike, but they wouldn't let me have a dirt bike, so they got me a four-wheeler. And I drove all over, logging roads and things like that with a gang of neighborhood boys. And I just really liked, to be outside. And my parents were pretty strict, and we had, I had set activities that I did. So I played the piano, played the clarinet, I did dance, gymnastics. To live in such a rural area, they really went out of their way to drive long distances so that I could do my activities. But what stands out the most is I got to spend a lot of time with my grandparents and my great-grandparents, who lived quite long, and my cousins. So it's, I really enjoy spending time with elderly people, and that, it shaped my personality a lot. Like I was very close to my Papaw and my grandpa, my grandma, and two great-grandmothers, one of whom lived, all the way until my first year here at ODU. And yeah, I like doing old people stuff, like going to cemeteries. I love going to cemeteries. I still love going to cemeteries. I have my grave plot all picked out back home, right in the family row. And, we go to Decoration Day. We tell stories about the dead. I love storytelling, ballad singing, canning, planting a garden by the signs of the moon, that sort of stuff. But also normal kid stuff, like, the thing to do in high school was we would go up on top of Robbinsville Mountain and just get away from parents, but we could never go alone because, it's way up in the middle of nowhere, and if you drove off the side of the mountain, somebody needed to know about it. So, that's what we did for fun in high school. We literally hung out on top of Robbinsville Mountain.
This is great. You get to know people you've known for a long time. I love cemeteries too. I take my students to cemeteries.
Oh, that's right. That is such a good idea.
So tell me, what does it mean to use the term linguistics? What do linguists do?
I am glad that you asked that, because what linguistics is really not widely known. So linguistics is the scientific study of language. And I always emphasize the science part of linguistics. I think that that's what makes us special when it comes to our approach to language. So, at cocktail parties, sometimes people think it means translator, or they think it means you speak a whole bunch of different languages. But that's not what it means. It means a scientific approach to the study of language.
Let me just follow up with that, if I can ask a kind of question. You use the word Papaw and Mamaw, and I love it when people refer to their grandparents that way. So how would a linguist explain those kinds of words? Is that an okay question?
Oh,
that's off the cuff.
That's a good question. Papaw and Nanny and Mamaw are very common old-fashioned mountain terms for grandparents. So in my family, we had Papaw and Nanny on one side, but then we had Grandma and Grandpa on the other. But that was because we needed to distinguish between, Papaw and Nanny and Grandma and Grandpa. But there are a lot of Mamaws in the mountains where I come from too, and these are just very old words. So, Papaw is a relic feature that goes pretty far back in the history of English, and it's not found just in the mountains, but it is found in rural southern areas. And the interesting thing about these terms for grandparents is that they are still going strong. So, even though these are really old words, there are still a lot of papaws and nannies and mamaws and mamaws.
Sounds good. This question I really wanted to ask you because I was reading something about you in a local newspaper. When I was growing up, people always made fun of my voice. Teachers made fun of my voice. They said it was squeaky and irritating. I had one teacher that always made me swallow before I would talk. I had somebody on the PhD level that told me I'd never make it in the classroom because my voice was too squeaky and that I should lower it, right? So I read that you were told as well that you needed to change your accent. You needed to get rid of your Appalachian accent. And while I often lower my voice when I speak publicly, obviously you decided not to do that. So can you tell us a little about that? People having the audacity to tell you need to drop your accent, Bridget, and your response to that.
Well, first of all, I want to say, Annette, that there is nothing wrong with your voice.
Thank
And
you.
I can tell you why those features were mentioned. Those features were mentioned because they are associated with female speech. And the only parts of language that are policed in our society are the ones that are associated with stigmatized groups. And I hate to say, but women are stigmatized in our society, unfortunately. So these are just sort of, hyper feminine aspects of speech that people were picking up on, and though it's often done in a well-intentioned way, it's totally misinformed. There is nothing wrong with the pitch of your voice, and you don't need to swallow. And they were wrong to police your speech. In my case, I did not think about my speech at all until I got into high school. And when I was in high school, I was obsessed with getting scholarships to go to college because I swear I didn't even know there was such a thing as financial aid. Nobody ever told me about it. No guidance counselor ever mentioned it to me. We were raised to believe that if we did not get scholarships, we would not go to college. And my parents were dead set on us going to college. So once I started applying for scholarships, that's when just a few of my very good teachers, who were just excellent teachers and very sweet, started worrying because one of the scholarships in particular required an interview, like a long interview, like an hour-long interview, in the middle of the state outside the mountains. And so they were worried about how people from outside the mountains would judge me based on my speech. And I was just really surprised. And then it was like a big effort on the part of a lot of people, including a speech language pathologist. And I was just really surprised that this would even be an issue. And it worried me. It really worried me. And it worried me especially because at that time, I really, more than anything in the world, wanted to be an English teacher, a high school English teacher. That is what I wanted to do. And I mean, my heart was just set on it. And so I was worried that it would cause problems, with me being a high school English teacher. Yeah, but I didn't change the way that I pronounced my words, and that's what they were focused on, because I was already style shifting then to pretty standard syntax, which even that kind of irritated me because, I write very standardly, but I found it sort of irritating to feel like, and nobody told me to do this, I just naturally did it because we pick up on these, language attitudes. And so I had already started style shifting pretty significantly for my syntax, which standard syntax is quite different from Appalachian syntax. But for my sounds, I just drew the line at that because it sounded so fake. Like in my little training sessions and practice sessions, it just did not sound like me. And it really irritated me. So I just didn't do it. But it worried me.
Can you speak about some of your work? Tell us a little bit about Southern Mountain Talk or
Sure.
any of your projects.
Yeah. Well, Southern Mountain Talk is the book that I'm in up to my neck to right now. And, it's, in some ways, I feel like this is the book I was born to write. And it's much more difficult for me than my first book, because my first book was my theoretical contribution. And so it was just, that to me, that was very straightforward. That was what I was trained to do. It was very straightforward. This project is difficult for me. It's for the University of Tennessee Press. It's meant to be accessible to a wide general audience. And I'm not just in my niche area. My niche areas are language and society, so it is in that area. But also acoustic phonetics is one of my specializations. And for this book, I'm really branching out. I'm doing not just sounds, but also the syntax, which is like sort of going full circle to how I first entered linguistics to begin with. But syntax is challenging, because I just don't do that as much as I do sound stuff. And I'm also doing a discourse analysis chapter, and I'm doing stance, which is how speakers position themselves with respect to what they're talking about and who they're talking to. And I'm doing things that I've never done before, like prosody, which is like the music of speech. So that is a pretty new area for me and in sociolinguistics more generally. And so all the while, so I'm doing all this new stuff, and I've got a huge data set based on, more than 10 years of field work with 3 different populations: Western North Carolina Appalachian white people, and Cherokee people from Western North Carolina, and then Detroit Appalachian migrants. And so since I collected this data over such a long period of time, and I started collecting it so long ago, a lot of the older people have died. And there are a lot of people in my own family whose voices I'm working with, who have passed. And so, it's kind of psychologically challenging, but it's, it's a good thing because, there are entire ways of living that are just, that just vanish into time. And this is the way that life works. I'm sort of a nostalgic person. I think it's kind of a weakness. But even when I pass by, like, old buildings that you can tell used to have so much life in them and so much character, or, like, abandoned houses just break my heart. So, when I think about ways of seeing the world that really just exist now in memories and stories, that really touches my heart. And I just love the way that old people lived. Like my great-grandparents, my great-grandmother lived a very long time, but they never drove cars. They, never got driver's license, anything like that. They grew all their own food. They were against working public jobs. They didn't give people in the family a hard time for working public jobs, but it was so interesting how they were just against public jobs, because if you work a public job, then you don't have time to just raise all the food you need and work your land and do all the things you need to do. So they were, always talking about such and such got a public job. And making stuff. And my great-grandmother cooked on a wood stove until she died. She just did, she just loved, and she was happy. She loved living that way. So, I don't have a wood stove or anything like that. And I grow some food, but not all my food. But I love simple living to the extent that I'm able. So I do try to make some acorn flour to put back and things like that. But it was just a much simpler time. And in some ways, the simple life is, it can be less stressful. It's hard. It's a hard way to live, but it's also very satisfying.
One thing I like about academic books is it's often hard, really, to see the individuality of the person, whereas every academic book, it doesn't matter what it is, there's a personal narrative there. What got you to that point? So I think your comments are very interesting. You often talk about forensic linguistic casework. Mm-hmm. And secretly, I've always wanted to ask you what that meant, but I just never gotten around to it. So, Bridget, tell us, what is forensic linguistic casework?
Well, I love this question because this is my side hustle. And I'm a person that always has sort of things on, I don't know how to explain it. I like to have a side hustle. So, and really it coincides with coming to ODU. So forensic linguistics is using linguistics in criminal investigations and in language in the law. So I've worked on all different kinds of cases. And the way that I got into it was, when I got this job at ODU, I thought about its proximity to Washington, D.C., and I thought about, do I have any skills that I could use in a side hustle that is related to my work, but, something different. And so I reached out to the Secret Service because at that time they had a voice. I found their voice recognition program manual online, and I noticed that it had less than a 17% success rate, and that was for mainstream white speech. So, I looked at the specs for it, and I felt like I had figured out what I could contribute to this project. So I called and left a message for the one linguist that worked for the Secret Service at that time. Her name is Reva Schwartz. We're still, in contact. I love her to death. She's gone into private industry now, but she was at the Secret Service for a long time. I called her up and left a message on her voicemail where, I just laid out in rapid fire what I thought I could do. And she called me the next day, and I worked for 3 years on a federally funded project with a team of people to help make the voice recognition system work better for everyday types of speech. And then from there, she started giving me referrals for casework because the Secret Service, they get involved in things that have to do with the security of the president or the treasury, but sometimes local law enforcement will go to the Secret Service if they have a vexing problem, like a serial bomb threat maker or something like that. And for things that had to do with voice analysis, she started referring people to me. And so that's how I got started working on criminal investigations. So, for example, if someone calls in a bunch of bomb threats, if the police can round up some suspects and tape record the interviews with the suspects, then I can do a fine-grained acoustic analysis to determine whether or not any of those voices match with the unknown source, which is the bomb threat. So, believe it or not, I don't advertise. Not yet. I get most of my cases word of mouth, and I'm in a federal database. I'm not sure how I got in the federal database, but I've had cases with the Department of Justice, Department of Homeland Security, a few different cases for the Secret Service, different field offices of the Secret Service. I worked on I've had several bomb threat cases. I've had some harassment cases where people were being harassed by phone. I've had an identity threat case. I worked on a murder for hire case in Washington State, which was a pretty scary case. I've been involved in some narcotics investigations. I worked on a trademark case. I even branched out into trademark stuff and had a trademark case that involved Larry the Cable Guy trying to lay claim to the phrase "get her done," and he was trying to, and I hope this does get recorded and put online because this is wrong. Tried to put a mom and pop gas station out of business, the Get Her Done gas station, which had been called the Get Her Done gas station since before he was born. Yeah, which that is a rural Southern phrase that goes back at least to the Civil War. I found it in a Civil War ballad, as a matter of fact. So he can't lay claim to a very common phrase that has spread throughout the rural United States and even up into Canada. That is all over the place. You can't just own it. Yeah.
Well, I have 3 more questions for you. It's time to switch and begin talking to Jennifer, but what I've learned here is that Dr. Anderson is helping to keep America safe. Right? All right, you ready, Jenny?
I'm ready.
All right. First easy question. What attracted you to ships and to shipbuilding?
Well, what attracted me to ships and shipbuilding was a long family history. I'm considered a 4th generation shipbuilder. So my great-grandfather and my grandfather and then my dad and his brother, my uncle, all worked in a long line of shipbuilding, both in the UK and here locally in Newport News. So that really, I think just growing up and listening to them, we spent a lot of time at my grandparents' house in Newport News, and similar to what Bridget was saying, just that great influence growing up. And so my grandmother would refer to it as yard talk, and she did not like yard talk around the children. But I really enjoyed listening to all of them, and they all had a different perspective. My I didn't know my great-grandfather. They had passed away before I was born, but for my grandfather, he started in the trades. He went to the apprentice school at Newport Shipbuilding and worked his way up to basically head of trades at the time. And so he was looking at it from the trades perspective and from the waterfront perspective. And then for my dad, he went to Virginia Tech, and he was in the Navy, and he's a marine engineer and naval architect. So he was looking at issues from the design side, from the engineering side. And then my uncle sort of spanned between the two because he did a lot of work on the waterfront. He did a lot of work with just sort of the operations side of the shipyard. And so you would always hear, like, the newspaper was always out, and there was always something having to do with the yard. And then sort of as we got to my grandparents' house, I would get to hear, even from a young age, like the different perspectives. And it was, there was always their view coming into it, but the common thread I heard from all of it was just really this pride in working there and building ships and maintaining them and doing things for the Navy, and like a very patriotic family. So I think that had a big influence on me. And then also growing up, my dad has a private passion, a hobby of building boats, building wooden boats. And so it started when he was in high school, and he designed and built this beautiful day sailor that he, I think, used that to woo my mom when they first met. And then, that sort of, it made its way down to when they settled it back into Newport News, and we used it as a fort, so it sat out in the yard and rotted for a long period of time. And he was like, we really need to bring this back to life. So my two older brothers and I helped him through that process in our garage. So we had this garage boatyard. And then also he and I, as a sort of a middle school project, built a wooden sailing pram, which is only a little 8-foot pram, but my husband and I have that today for our kids. So it's just this long history of growing up on the water and listening to shipbuilding talk and knowing it's such a big influence here. And then when I sort of always knew I enjoyed math and science. I love the science fair. I love working on math problems. And I actually had my sights on Virginia Tech, I think, because my dad went there, and sort of this Hokie nation, and I had been accepted as early acceptance for Virginia Tech's program, and I got this letter in the mail, and my senior year, and it was from Webb Institute, this private school in New York, and it's like, we've looked at your SAT scores, and I must have checked a box somewhere that said I was interested in naval architecture, which is the only double degree they offer. And they're like, would you consider applying here? So I had never heard of it, but it was a 1-page application. So I'm like, yes, I will. So, and I said to my dad, like, Dad, have you heard of this? He's like, oh, yeah, like I work with some people. They call us Webbies. So we're like, yeah, I know some Webbies. They're interesting, but really smart people. So, why don't you give it a shot? So I sent in the application, and their process for admittance is they will invite you to the campus, and you interview with the president and with all the faculty. You interview with the students. You spend the night at the college. It's a really small school. You spend the night there, and sort of you get a sense of the life there. But then also I think the students are also sort of getting a sense of if they think that you would fit into that Webby lifestyle. So, they offered me the opportunity to go there and talked it over with my parents, and they're like, well, it is full tuition scholarship, so you can try it for 1 year, and if it doesn't work out, you can always go back to your original plan. And that from there, I was just totally hooked. Like this was just the journey that I was meant to be on. So, yeah.
Sounds great. I want to just stay in the past for just a minute, because when I was reading some of the materials on you and when we talked, as a historian, one of the things I found most fascinating is that this family shipbuilding isn't just Newport News, but it goes all the way back to England.
Yes.
So if you could just mention a little bit about that that heritage, clearly the people in her family have been building ships for a very long time.
Very, very long time, yes. So my great-grandfather on my dad's side, Bertram Edgar Slater, who I was not able to meet, but he grew up in northern England, and in that location, in sort of the Lake Country and Barrow and Furnace area, has been for many, many years one of the large British shipyards. And it's currently BAE Systems, and they do the British submarines, but it's always been a shipbuilding area. And with Newport News Shipbuilding, when they stood up the yard here, they sort of went out internationally and were scouting for the workers, for skilled trades, for engineers, for every position they were looking to fill. But through that network, my great-grandfather heard about the opportunities here in Newport News, and he and my great-grandmother and my grandmother, who was a small child, immigrated to Newport News in order for him to work at the shipyard. So it's been interesting going back through the Ancestry.com and those things. You can see like the different trips he was taking back and forth on the commercial transit ships back in through New York and then coming back down, and that's been really interesting to see. And then my grandfather, he grew up in a farm, one of many children in Florence, South Carolina, and he, I think, sort of when you were talking about your background and this rural background, he really wanted to, I think, get out of that area, and he knew about the apprentice school at Newport News, and he set his sights that is what he needed to do, and he pushed his way through high school and graduated early to come up to the apprentice school. And then at that time they're like, well, actually you're too young, so you need to wait a little bit, and then we'll accept you into the program. But yeah, that was his focus, that he wanted to do that. And he had an interesting career, that he was electrician trades, graduated the apprentice school, and then for the first nuclear aircraft carrier, which was the Enterprise, which they had a long life of 50 plus years, and they're now decommissioning at the shipyard. But he actually was part of the team that went out to Idaho Falls, Idaho, when they built the reactor that would become sort of the prototype for putting these nuclear reactors on the Enterprise. So he was out there, and even my dad went out there for his senior year, and even though they always grew up in Newport News, he graduated high school from Idaho Falls because my grandfather was out there when the reactor went live, which means when they brought it up to full power. Yeah.
Well, that's fascinating, but what I'm hearing is he. So my third question is, as a woman, did you encounter problems or walls in the shipbuilding industry? And isn't it still unusual to be a woman in this field?
Yeah, I would say it's, we're definitely not seeing, the 50% women in the industry. And, certainly, I don't know what the percentage was like, in the past. I know during the wars and things like that, they had a strong buildup of women. But, I guess growing up, I never felt any of that. I mean, I never, when I was hearing all this yard talk, it was never about, issues with women in the yard. And for me personally, I had two older brothers, but it was like anything they were doing, I was doing. And that's how my parents, raised us. That was, if the boys had to cut the grass, I had to cut the grass. Mm-hmm. If we need to, help Dad with the boat or help Dad with the cars, I was helping him with the boat and the cars. And my mom was very successful in her career, so I always saw her working. But it was never, playing sports and growing up, it was never, I never felt any of that at all. And even, I think about my influential teachers in high school, my math teachers, my science teachers, they were all women. So, and I went to a really large high school. So I never felt any of that at all. When I went to Webb, I think that's when it first dawned on me. I mean, at Webb, it is a small school. There's a total of 80 students on average. Mm-hmm. So they accept 25 students, and they're graduating 17 to 18 students after 4 years. And I was the only female in that class. But even still with my peers, you never felt that. So there was 80 students and maybe 11 to 12 females. The number's gotten higher since then, but I never felt any of that. It was, but that's when I first realized the difference. And at Webb, we have a lot of experiential learning. We have to go out on ship. We have to work in a shipyard as a tradesperson, and then we spend 2 years in the design firms or design fields. And so then I started to see more and more that there were not very many women in the field. And so when I went into start my career for the government, I mean, in many cases on design teams, I would be the only woman. I would be the only woman in the briefing room. I may be the person doing the briefing. But I think that I look at all the things I accomplished. Very successful programs, very cutting edge for special forces, working for foreign militaries to help them, our allied nations. I think that there could have been probably that stigma or that pressure or that influence, but for me personally, I would have to attribute it to two things. Probably my direct supervisors were amazing people, like in every case, when I worked for the government, when I worked in private industry, and they were men, but and it wasn't even necessarily that they had children, because a couple of them didn't have any children, but they always saw me for my capability. And there was never, we're not going to give that to Jenny because she's a woman, or we're not going to send her on this trip because she's a woman, or can she brief this to the admiral, because she's a woman. So I always had amazing opportunities, and I really took those and ran with them. But I never felt that negative influence, and probably because if it was happening, I had great leadership that was helping, protect me, as they should protect everyone that's working for them. And I think the other influence for me was always, I think, just how I was raised, that never came into question, that I couldn't do something because I was a woman. And I even had, looking back, you catch up with people on Facebook, and they're like, you were the one that beat me in the science fair, or you were the one that I couldn't, beat in kickball, or whatever it was. So, and these are typically guys saying that, but yeah, and I think too that if I was nervous going into a briefing, it was because I was nervous that, did I know the material or not? I never felt I'm nervous because I'm a woman. It was like, am I going to be able to answer the hard questions? Am I prepared? Is the team prepared? So I think that's, sort of how I always looked at it.
All right. Well, why don't we ask a different question now and tell us, what's the best part about being a ship designer?
Well, I mean, it's amazing. Look around at all the ships in the harbor and think about people designing those. No, it's for me, it's always been really exciting to think about, just first of all, designing and building something. So that's exciting. And the projects I got to work on for the military, it was always a really hard problem. It was, I did spend all of my career supporting naval special warfare, both our U.S. forces and our allied forces. And they have a very, they're very focused. They're small teams. They call themselves the tip of the spear. And they are doing very challenging operations in all aspects. How do they get into theater? Now I have to design a vessel that not only can float and go fast and carry guns and do all these things, it also has to fit into an airplane so they can get into theater. So lots of challenging aspects to their missions, and also just the chance to be able to sort of get a hard problem and think about how can you bring a team together to solve that problem. What are the engineering disciplines that you would need to bring together? What are the technologies that you would need to leverage? Who's doing this in academia? What companies could we, partner with? and putting all of that together, and then just sort of helping, when I was leading programs, sort of help lead the people. Like, we're a lot of engineers, and we have lots of quirky personalities. So some people are, we'd be in a meeting, and I know that this person has the information to contribute, but they're very reserved, and they don't like talking in a group, or, just like the dynamics of that, and to be able to help people and draw out the best that they have to offer and offer to the team. And then it's like dealing with failure, because these are hard problems. So how do you manage that risk? How do you manage the risk of your sponsor, of your, of the military? How do you work through a testing program where you've designed it, now you're building it, problems come up during construction, now you're testing it, problems came up during testing. How do you get all the way to, the end goal, which is to field something into service? And even in cases like that, I mean, with the folks we supported for the military, there was no sugarcoating it. Like, if something didn't work, it was like dropped on your desk the next day, like, this sucks. This didn't work. This didn't help. What are you going to do about it? So you get some really immediate feedback, and and trying to, like, okay, well, why didn't it work? Let's talk through this. Like, so I think all of those things were really exciting and very fulfilling. And I never saw myself wearing a uniform, but I do feel that I've been able to use my talents to help the military and really make a difference in that arena. So, yeah.
Sounds great. How do you inspire your students today in terms of studying ship design?
Yeah, that is my passion. Since I came here, I'm very direct with the students. Like, first day, I'm like, here's my background, and while you're in my class, my goal is not only to teach you the material, but to try to convince you to go into this field. If you're interested in electrical engineering or mechanical engineering or civil engineering, there's an amazing career for you in this field, working for the shipyards, working for the naval enterprise, working in the private industry, because we really need that talent. And there's a stigma associated with shipbuilding, both for young men and for young women, that they think shipbuilding is dusty and dirty, and it's like, no, we're doing these. We have so much amazing technology that we're using to design, that we're using to build, and then think of all the advanced technologies that we're putting into these ships. I mean, laser weapons, like, just it's an amazing time to be in this field. And while I have the students in the classroom, I'm sort of constantly trying to find ways to excite them about it, tell them about my experience, tell them about things that are going on in the news, and talk to them about internships and career mentoring, and just trying to find that thing that's going to click for them, that hopefully they will then, sort of think about applying for a job in the industry. So.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you so much. We've gotten to the point in the program where we're going to model the actor studio, and I'm going to ask you each some fun questions, kind of rapid fire, nothing you prepared for, but I promise it's not painful, okay? So you're ready? I think given the nature of the first question that we have to start with Bridget, okay? So the first question's really towards her, the second one's more towards you, but you get to answer them both. So Bridget, what's your favorite word?
Oh my goodness, that is such a great question. That is one of my favorite words. Well, do you want me to be really honest?
Sure. Provost, can she be really honest?
Well, much to the dismay of some of my family members who love me anyway, I do love taboo language. So, I love taboo language. I love it because of its ideological force. It just has so much ideological force. So I actually have two words that are my favorite words, and they are related words. And it's just because of the words and the way they sound, not so much the concepts. But I also like the words because they're very old-timey. But I love the word, but it's also sort of ideological while I like the words. I mean, obviously, you know, this is like dangerous territory because I'm having to like hedge all the way up to it. I would have to say that my two favorite words are cooter and pecker, and the reason why I like those words because they are very country words, and they are words that country people understand in the rural South. And I like those words because that is how we were raised, to refer to those body parts. And there was an ideological component to that because, you know, the mainstream words are just so clinical. I mean, there's so many negative connotations. I mean, like, for example, the word vagina, you know, that means you've got to go to the doctor. That means you're at the doctor's office. If you are not at the doctor's office, you do not use that word. And, you know, and these are words of power back home too. So, you know, they don't even, in some contexts, they don't even necessarily mean the particular body part. It means a certain kind of power. Like cooter power is like a solidarity thing among women. And you know, it gets at the policing of language too, because whenever I use those words, you know, people can have a strange reaction to it. But words are words. So, you know, as long as the word penis is acceptable, pecker should be accessible. As long, you know, that should be acceptable. As long as the word vagina is acceptable, cooter should be acceptable. I mean, these are just words. But the words to me mean, you know, the country and being down to earth. And so honestly, if I were to write a novel that wove together a bunch of gender stuff, my dream would be to call it Cooters and Peckers. And then I would write a follow-up novel based on my friends from high school and call it Cooter Queens, because that's what they call themselves. Yeah. So that's the honest truth. Those are my two favorite words.
Jenny, what is the sound or noise that you love the most?
Oh, a sound or a noise? See, I was going to answer Bridget's question.
You should. Taboo language is a beautiful thing.
Go ahead. Answer either question.
Well, I would have to say my favorite word, the word that I use all the time and I've used, you know, all my life, is y'all. And
I
people
love that.
People know me, and the students know that it's like, and I think in the classroom it has an immediate effect of sort of bringing us all down, like, you know, we're all friends, like, let's get down to business and let's learn this. But even through when I've traveled and I've been, you know, shipyards all over the world and then going up north for school, y'all has always been like in my heart a way to maintain my Southern Virginia roots. So I have to say that that's probably the word that I use the most, yeah.
All right. Well, we're short on time, so I'm going to skip the noise question. And just ask you each one very quickly. Bridget and Jenny, if you could give advice to the young Bridget and Jenny, what advice would you give? And you've got like 30 seconds, right?
You go first, Jenny.
Okay. I would say to the young Jenny, you know, to follow my heart, which has led me to here, you know, and that I had a great upbringing to rely on that, and that you never know where life is going to take you, and also to cherish the people that come into your life. I would say that people are coming into your life for a very specific reason, and really to embrace that, and to make sure that you thank them.
Great. Bridget?
What
does young Bridget need to know?
Oh, she needs to know more than anything not to worry so much. When I was in grad school, Walt Wolfram, who was my mentor at NC State, and he's still my mentor, he's like my academic dad, he always called me Stress Bucket. That was my first nickname. And, you know, I worried a lot and didn't really have that much to worry about. But it was all just sort of so high stakes to me. And then also following up on what Jenny said, it would be to go home, you know, to go home and to, you know, time is passing fast and you don't realize it when you're young as much. You know, it is very fleeting.
Sounds great. Okay, Jenny, I think you're going to show us a quick
Oh,
video,
yeah.
right?
Newport News Shipbuilding is a 130-year-old company, and the opportunity today is for us to reinvent ourselves. You know, we've seen the products we built go from a tugboat to today the modern nuclear-powered aircraft carrier and submarines.
When you think about the value stream for shipbuilding, we design, we engineer, we procure material, we plan, we manufacture, and we assemble and test. There's not one aspect of that value stream that's not dependent on the others.
We have lots and lots of data. We now have a Ford class that is completely 3D modeled. Can we take that 3D model and push it through across the whole supply chain, manufacturing and everything?
It takes a lot of paper to build an aircraft carrier and a submarine. There's no reason we can't consolidate this stuff down into this digital environment.
So across the senior leadership team, there's a really strong shared vision to transition to a new integrated digital shipbuilding environment.
It's very important that we transfer data in a very timely manner, and integrated digital shipbuilding will help connect all of the partners in the value stream in a way that we don't operate today.
I really think it's going to streamline everything we do in the sense that right now we all have to carry individual weld records. We got to verify all this data and input the same things over and over and over. And the goal in the future is that we won't have to look at these drawings. We won't have to look at these weld records. We're just going to see what the trades before us input. We'll see what it is we have to do, inspect this. Is it satisfactory? Yes or no. Sign it off and it's done.
This is the reinvention that is what the decision to go into nuclear power in the 50s was, going from riveted hulls to welded hulls. And I think this is every bit that kind of a game changer for the company.
I think our planning challenges, our manufacturing challenges are the same as most companies in industry. The problem that we encounter is that we don't make one thing, and there's not a common way of doing it. So there's a lot of customization. There's a lot of creativity required and investment required to create a plan for something as complex as an aircraft carrier or a submarine.
We're able to provide the employees, both the mechanic doing the work, the supervisor, the inspector, everybody involved with it, all the information they need on a screen with the touch of a button.
It reduces a lot of the time that I have to spend in the morning setting up jobs. From my crew, it's giving them clear-cut instruction every day instead of them having to come to me and find a drawing number. It's already right there on their work assignment sheet.
My mechanics, they love it. They say it's excellent. It's the best tool we ever had for us, like the information.
I've talked to mechanics who's walking around with iPads, and I purposely wanted to know how they feel about it. They said, Ray, it was a culture shift, but now we've seen the power of what this piece of equipment can do for us. We don't have to walk off the job and spend hours looking for things. This is how we go about doing it. If we can cut our time, increase performance, and bring the heart of the employee into the business, we're on our way.
As we think about how do we provide the products that the nation, our Navy needs, it's incumbent on us to go look at how do we do that. And today, we are starting to reinvent ourselves. So we're here for the next 130 years.
So that's what we are calling digital shipbuilding or integrated digital shipbuilding, and it's a major initiative with ODU and Newport News Shipbuilding and the ship repair industry here in the region and all the suppliers across the state and our educational partners, the K through 12, the career and technical education, the community colleges, and really focused on how do we train the current workforce and the next generation workforce, because what this means for the industry and for the Navy is it's so expensive to build and maintain ships, and you probably hear all of that in the news and the scrutiny from Congress, and how are we going to go forward and maintain our existing ships and ramp up our fleet to a larger number of ships. And the way to really transform the industry is to go towards a digitization of the data, of the design phase, of the construction phase, using all these new tools, augmented reality, virtual reality, 3D scanning, and then on the maintenance side. And so the shipyards are embracing that, and the Navy is embracing that, but at the same time, there's a big workforce gap. So if we're going to capture those cost savings and also be able to attract the next generation and the best and brightest, we have to go in this direction. And for myself and the faculty here at ODU and our educational partners, it's like, well, how can ODU help the industry, help the Navy, help the state in making that transformation and training the next generation, and then also maintaining our contribution through research and through continuing education in the future. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so Bridget, this is the sort of the end of the program. So do you want to tell us whatever you want to tell us about linguistics?
I've got 5 minutes, right? Okay. Well, I'm going to divide it into 2 parts. The first part, the first 2.5 minutes or so, is there's a lot of misinformation about language that is unfortunately institutionalized. So I think it is very important to raise awareness about the nature and value of linguistic diversity. As long as we have different cultural groups, we are going to have different dialects and different ways of speaking. And it is just unacceptable for anyone to say that there is a correct and an incorrect way to speak. I mean, it's just based on complete misinformation. So all dialects have integrity in that they are fully functional language systems. And it is rude for the dominant groups in society to convey to other groups that the way that they speak is less than, or even worse, that it is broken English, or, I mean, it's just totally based on misinformation. And it's very snobby as well. So my mentors are very gentle in their approach. They just, try to educate. No, you don't know until you know. I tend to be very aggressive. Like, even if someone has not had linguistics, it is just not nice to criticize the way that someone else speaks. And, speakers can make decisions about switching back and forth to different registers or whatever, but that is a personal choice. And so language policing is identity policing, and that is never okay. The next thing, though, that I'd like to just briefly mention is I think that there are lots of areas that linguistics can and should be applied in solving problems and in working on things. So in addition to the forensic domain, I think it's really important to do community language studies, and I have a community language and oral history project that I've been doing with my students since I got here called Tidewater Voices. And that's really important because it helps capture some of these fleeting moments in time before they're gone, and voices and stories and ways of being to preserve those for future generations. I also think that it's important to look for new areas to apply our skills. So, for example, I'm getting ready to do some work with the Suffolk PD in the area of, community language and, how more effective ways to interview people and talk to people and go into communities. And, there's so many areas where it just fits in. And, I have 2 students right now, Patrick Green and Amanda Radke, who are working with me on a pro bono project that we're doing for the Southern Poverty Law Center, where we're analyzing thousands, and David Metzger's working on it too from the Honors College, and Amanda Hayek is working long distance on it. She's in grad school at University of Virginia, but she was one of our undergrad students, where we're analyzing thousands of pages of chats, leaked chats, where the Unite the Right rally was planned. And we're looking specifically for textual evidence of inciting violence. And, this is a pro bono case, but we're learning a lot about the way these groups build rapport with each other when they're planning their events, and how they communicate across, different platforms and for different individuals. And I have to say, it's a very disturbing project, but I think it's going to have a lot of applied value in understanding the threat that these sorts of events pose, and which can hopefully be used to mitigate that threat.
Great. Thank you so much. much. Well, I don't know if you can turn up the lights, but we have like maybe 5 minutes for questions. Does anyone out there want to ask a question? Okay.
Can you speak a little bit about the challenges, or maybe not any challenges, of balancing the different roles that you play? The role of a faculty, but also the role of a mom or a daughter, community member. How did you go?
Your question.
Well, thank you.
Two little bitty kids,
I
right?
do. I have a 3-year-old daughter and a 5-year-old son, and I would say that it truly takes a village. I mean, for us, it's a network of support in order to do the things that we want to do and balance it. And I would say, I mean, I did have children. I guess compared to some of my peers and my friends, probably later in life, because I'm 41 and I have young children. But I think for me, it's they are always the top priority. So if I can't make a meeting or I can't do something work related, it's because of them. It's because of the family. I always felt growing up that with everything that my parents did with their work and their activities in the community, and that always, I mean, they never missed a tennis match, and things like that. And it was like my dad was always there for every tennis match, and my mom was working crazy hours, like 9 to 9 every day, 5-6 days a week for years, and yet I never felt that any of that was missing. So if that does mean, and my husband will tease me because it's like we sort of have a schedule. It's like we get the kids to bed, and between the time that I'm getting home and they go to bed, it's like there's no discussion about work at all. But once they fall asleep, I could be working on something till 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. Like my students will say, like, it's crazy when we're getting emails from you. I'm like, that's true, and I don't know how long I can maintain this, but right now that's the focus for me. Yeah, but it does take a village.
In the back there. I have a question for Bridget, since we enjoy having language. The notion of person, because it seems like it's really increasing in our society. What's your position on that, and how do you think those of us who don't like person should react to this constant rise in our concern?
That is such a good question. I will say that taboo language has been around forever. So it's actually not increasing or anything. I understand there's that perception, but we have always had taboo language. And it's important to understand that from the perspective of a linguist, a word is a word is a word is a word. And it's up to speakers themselves to decide what contexts are appropriate, for their words. So, I probably would not go back to my childhood church and tell everyone, how enamored I am with the words cooter and pecker, because that would not be the appropriate context. Interestingly, I can do that here at ODU. So, speakers tend to, but speakers have different ideas of what the boundaries are and when they can do that. And, young people are rebels. So you're probably noticing it with young people, because whenever young people are doing something, people tend to worry, oh my gosh, is this the way that things are going? Is this the way that society's going? But young people have always been the language rebels. They're always going to push those boundaries. And, that's just part of growing up. And what is considered to be taboo language changes over time, space, and socially meaningful groups. So, for example, the word fuck goes back all the way to Old English and was not considered to be taboo at all in Old English. it was just a regular everyday word. And it's one of only about a dozen words from Old English that has survived. I mean, it's up there with meat and apple and words like that. There's been books written on this. I mean, there's one really interesting book published by the American Dialect Society at Duke University Press that is nothing but the etymology of the word fuck. But back when people were using it in Old English, which then it was fukin, but it meant the same thing, it was not even considered to be taboo. And when I was growing up, the big taboo word for older people like my grandparents and great-grandparents was bull. You were not supposed to say bull. You were supposed to say he cow or she cow, because there was this association of the word bull with very large bull testicles. Now, I mean, everybody did have cows, so but I remember like my grandma trying to explain this to me, and I was like, I don't understand why bull is a bad word. So, in mainstream society, that was not even considered to be taboo. So, and the reason why people like taboo language is because of its ideological force. So, I don't know why sometimes people get uncomfortable with taboo language, but I think it's one of those areas where you just have to live and let live. Yeah. But it's a good question.
Sounds good. Well, there's food out there. Would anyone like to ask one more question before we conclude? Provost Aga?
Well, just going back again to the comments of your students, it's very obvious that you are an effective faculty member. How is it possible for you to be effective in your scholarship, research, and also be effective in the classroom? Do they inform each other, or do you use it as two separate activities for your faculty?
That is such a good question. Jenny, you want to go first? Or do you want me to go first? Why don't you go first?
Yeah, I would say...
I don't think on my feet as quickly as Jenny does.
I'm motivated by the food, girl. I would say that for me, what propels me in the classroom is the passion. Like that I chose to be here to teach students, and that's what I want to do. And I'm very focused on what I hope to attain. I hope to inspire them. I hope to mentor them. I hope to instill in them a sense of confidence for them to pursue their dreams, and also a sense of their responsibility, their ethical responsibility in terms of, as engineers, that's sort of what we have as our technical reputation. So, I try to... Those are the things that I see, that mentorship role and that being an inspiration to them. And so that's what I'm focused on in the classroom. To the extent that I can bring in my research, my research is very broad. Like what you saw on the screen, I can talk about that with the students all day, and I love talking about that. And I can use some of those higher tech tools to inspire them to go into the field. Some of the work that I may do for the Navy that I can't discuss in the classroom, so I just sort of have to try to walk that balance there. Yeah, and also getting the students, I mean, a lot of the projects, if there's undergraduate student funding that I can bring them onto, I think that's a way to get them engaged and see how what they're learning in the classroom now has this application, not just in the lab, but out in the real world. Yeah.
I love that question. I think that's such an important question. And what I do is I have never seen my teaching and my research as being in competition. Ever, ever. They've always been very synergistic. And, I had great mentors when I was in college and when I was in grad school. I mean, really incredible mentors that just showed me the way to be a caring professor. I try to be somebody that looks ahead, that thinks about what future students have, what jobs they might be, what jobs they can get, but also just, we have such a brief amount of time together. I really cherish our time together, just being humans and doing linguistics together for a while. So one thing that I do is I love to teach. I really do love to teach. And there are some things that are just more fun to do with students. So like my Tidewater Voices project, we've collected over 800 oral histories all over Tidewater, and I could have never done that by myself. I mean, that is definitely me and my students in it together. So there are some research projects that you can do better as a faculty member if you involve students. And it's important to make those projects win-win for students so that they get good professional skills that they can use going forward. And like the white supremacy research project, I mean, when I first reached out to the Southern Poverty Law Center, I lined up some students first because there was no way I was going to do that by myself. There was no way. It was just too daunting. I'm trying to finish my book. It's kind of a depressing project to work on. But, I've got this great team of students. And, we love working together. So, we do have each other while we're working on, white supremacy. And one last thing I want to say is, I take my teaching very seriously, but we also have a good time. I feel like we have a good time in class, even though I am like super, super, super serious and probably too intense about my assignments. And, they have to give me drafts of analysis projects, and I tend to micromanage. So I'm not saying I'm a perfect teacher, but I assign projects that I think need to be done, skills they need to have, and I design projects, frankly, that I want to read and want to work with. So that makes grading far less onerous because I design projects that I think are important and that I'm fascinated by the results of the projects. But I think it's good for them too, and that's how I get away with that.
All right. Well, listen, thank you. Bridget Anderson and Jennifer McKaylee are stellar scholars, fabulous mentors, and just wonderful colleagues. So thank you, and let's give them a round of applause. Okay, there's a reception in the lobby. Thank you.